Hey grade 10s, good morning. How are you today? I'm fine. I'm a little sleepy today, but doing well. I hope you guys are all healthy and had a good spring break. As much fun as you can have. And yeah, so today's lesson will be on the Monkey's Paw. So it's our last short story for this short story unit. We're going to be doing a film, and it is on Netflix right now. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet because I don't want you guys to go watch it yet, but we'll kind of do that later this week, okay? And then just keep in mind too, technically there's no school on Friday and Monday for Easter, so we won't have like our my office hours or whatever. No one's really been like showing up, so like don't feel bad if you're not there. But if you do want to discuss anything with me, like your questions from your short stories, so what I do is I print them all out and mark them. So if you ever want to like go over them with me, just let me know, or like which ones maybe you missed. That's what this time is for. Okay, so I know it's challenging doing learning online, but you guys just have to step it up and take responsibility for your own education, really, and pull up your socks and do the best you can. I'm really trying to do like minimal, just like reading comprehension and like writing skills. Like that's all we're gonna kind of be focusing on, okay? But everything we're doing is at like a grade 10 academic English level. So if you are struggling, then maybe next year you might want to look at dropping on to -2, because you should be able to like read these stories on your own and have a level of understanding. And like what I'm doing in these videos is essentially what I would do in class as well, okay? So if you're not watching the videos and like taking your time, you might struggle. But most of you are doing really well. Some of you, your annotations are just beautiful, just so appeasing to these old teacher eyes. I'm so happy. And overall, you guys are doing really well. And if you ever just want to pop in and say hello, I know you get to see me on this video, but I don't ever get to see you guys. So even if you want to just stop in and say hi on the Google Meet or whatever, that'd be awesome. Okay, so the Monkey's Paw, all right? So we start off with like setting, right? The night was cold and wet. Small parlor, the blinds are drawn, the fire burned brightly. So you get this image in your mind, right? It's cold and dark, but there's a nice warm fire going on, and the opening scene is the father and son are playing chess, and then it describes how the son is kind of inventive and trying out some new moves, and he ends up outsmarting the father and getting a checkmate on him. And the father realizes it, right, and tries to like not draw attention to it. And then Mr. White kind of starts complaining about where they live, how far away it is from everything. Okay, so again, if you've read the whole story, that's a little bit of foreshadowing as well. And he just kind of like complains, right, about where they live. The road's a torrent, pathway's a bog, right, describing how frustrated he is with certain things. And then the wife, right, so they obviously have a good relationship, or like she understands him, because she says, "Never mind, dear," said his wife soothingly. "Perhaps he'll win the next one." So she knows that he's just upset about losing the chess match, is why he's lashing out about where they live. This author, Jacobs, you have to really pay attention to how he describes when a character says something, because that gives us a lot of distinctive character traits about like how that character is feeling, and I'll explain that as we go. Okay, and so they're waiting for a visitor, right? And then they finally hear the gate loudly bang, and the heavy steps coming up the door. And the old man rose with hospitable haste, so a nice alliteration there on the top of page 2. And then we just have character for how this man's described: tall, burly man, beady of eye, and Rubicon of visage, right? So Sergeant Major Morris is introduced. And he takes a seat by the fire. They're having some drinks. They're socializing. And the family's like eagerly listening to all his stories, right? Because they don't travel much or they live in this farther out place. They're so excited to hear about his adventures, like doughty of deeds of wars and plagues and strange peoples. So to them, it's very exciting. Some figurative language there. So Mr. White, 21 years of it, said Mr. White, nodding at his wife and son. When he went away, he was slip of a youth in the warehouse. Now look at him. So just kind of like comparing how much he's changed and grown into maybe like a man now. And he's, I'd like to go to India myself, said the old man, just to look around a bit, you know? So that tells us too that he's like envious of this adventure and travel, Mr. White. Like he wishes he could do things like that. And then the sergeant major says, better where you are, shaking his head. He put down on the empty glass, sighing softly and shook it again, right? So that's telling us too that he has maybe regret about his travels. If he's like, better where you are, like shaking his head, like, and sighing. So that you got to read those like subliminal messages that like that is displaying to us about how he feels about his travels. And again, the old man's just saying, oh, I wish I could see all these things. And he's like, weren't you telling me something about a monkey's paw? And then it says, nothing, said the soldier hastily. Leastwise, nothing worth hearing. So he's quickly trying to dismiss it. So that tells us again that he like doesn't want to talk about it, or he doesn't want Mr. White to know what he knows. Okay, so those little pieces you gotta pay attention to. Monkey's paw, said Mrs. White, like curiously, right? So again, that tells us that she's intrigued. She's interested. She wants to hear. And that's character. His three listeners lean forward eagerly. So they're all excited. That's what that is displaying to us. And so he says, to look at it, said the sergeant major, fumbling in his pocket. So if you're fumbling too for something, like you can't hold it well, that maybe is a sign he's nervous, right? He doesn't want to bring it out. He doesn't want to show them. So he's saying to look at it, it just looks like an ordinary little paw dried to a mummy. And Mrs. White drew back with a grimace. So she's like, ugh, she finds it repulsive. But her son examines it curiously. So again, their responses are different on how they're reacting to this item. Okay, so in the middle of page 3, definitely a good quote for theme. Okay, the paragraph, it had a spell put on it by an old fakir. The sergeant major, a very holy man. He wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives and that those who interfered with it did so to their sorrow. Okay, so he's telling them that this item, if you tempt fate or mess with fate, it'll lead to your demise. It'll bring you sorrow and sadness. And that's why this guy put these wishes on it, to teach people that you should not mess with fate. And then the next line, good for character too. His manner was so impressive that his hearers were conscious that their light laughter jarred somewhat. So basically, when someone says something ridiculous, you're going to start laughing at them. So they start to laugh, but then what he says has such strong conviction. They're kind of like, haha, and they're like, ha, 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 like, oh, he's serious. Like, this is a true thing. So they kind of take it serious somewhat, or they stop laughing. And then like, well, why don't you have 3, sir, said Herbert White cleverly. So the son's like questioning, right? Like, well, what are you doing? Why don't you have 3? And then he says, I have, he said quietly. His blotchy face whitened. So again, for character, if his red face, like his blotchy face from like drinking or whatever, turns white, we know that represents fear, right? So this sergeant is terrified of what he's talking about, or he knows it's real, and he's visibly, physically showing fear. And they just kind of ask about the wishes. So on page 4 now, and the top of page 4, another good one for theme, right? The first man had his 3 wishes. Yes, was the reply. I don't know what the first 2 were, but the third was for death. That's how I got the paw. So someone to wish for their own death, they're trying to avoid something, right? Or they want out, to wish death upon themselves. And so maybe a little bit of foreshadowing there too, right? If you've read the whole story, which you should have. His tones were so grave that a hush fell upon the group. So his tones are so grave. So again, that's intensity, that's fear. So we know how he's feeling about this. Kind of down halfway through page 4, he took the paw and dangling it between his front finger and thumb, suddenly threw it upon the fire. So again, he sees it as a burden. He wants to be rid of it. He doesn't think it should be allowed to be around, right? He's trying to burn it. And then Mr. White, with a slight cry, stooped down and snatched it off. So Mr. White, in greed, right, is like, I want this opportunity. Why are you taking it away from me? So he's not hearing the lesson that he's saying, like, you will have sorrow. The other guy wished for death, right? As human beings, maybe when something's dangled in front of us that we desire greatly, we won't listen to any warnings about why it might be bad. We just selfishly go after it because that's what we want right at that moment. And he says, better let it burn, said the soldier solemnly. So again, he's like regretful and like, you should get rid of it. Don't put up with it. If you don't want it, Morris, said the old man, give it to me. I won't, said his friend, doggedly. So again, he's like, I don't want to give it to you. This is terrible. Okay. And then for theme, right in here, I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Pitch it on the fire again, like a sensible man. So again, he's warning him, right? I tried to burn it. If you want to keep it, go ahead. But whatever happens to you, don't put the blame on me. Like, I've tried to warn you. Be sensible. See the truth that this is not a good item to have, or it's not good to tempt fate. And so then he's like, how do you use it? And he says, hold it up in your right hand and wish aloud, said the sergeant major, but I warn you of the consequences. So again, with theme, right, he's warning him, don't tempt fate. And really, the one problem I have with this story, sorry, is that if the sergeant really didn't want his friend to be able to use it, he wouldn't have told him how to use it, right? He would have just let it burn or been more forceful and like taking it away from him. So he's kind of passive in that way, that he like lets him have this item and teaches him how to use it properly. And then an illusion there, right? Sounds like the Arabian Nights, or like simile as well. And then the wife making a joke, right? Don't you think you might wish for 4 pairs of hands for me? Like, ha ha ha. Like, they're not taking it seriously. And the last line there, with a look of alarm on his face, caught him by the arm. So again, he's terrified. He's scared. Top of page 5, if you must wish, he said gruffly, so like frustrated, wish for something sensible. So don't take it over the top. Be reasonable with what you want to wish for. Okay, so then they have dinner and they kind of forget about it, and he talks more about India and all his adventures and like all the amazing things he has, and then he leaves. And the son kind of says, like, if the tale about the monkey's paw is not more truthful than those he's been telling us, like about India, we shan't make much out of it. So he's like doubting its power. He's like, oh, this sounds so crazy, ridiculous. Obviously, they're not well traveled, so they can't like verify, but he's like, I doubt it has any actual power. So Mrs. White says, like, did you give him anything for it, right? In exchange or like payment? And he says, a trifle, he said, coloring slightly. So when coloring slightly, you blush, which means you're embarrassed. So again, that's character, right? He's kind of embarrassed that he paid for it. He didn't want it, but I made him take it, and he pressed me again to throw it away. So again, that theme of like, he's determined to get rid of it. He's like, do not tempt fate. Get rid of it, okay? Likely, said Herbert with pretend horror. So again, Herbert's like, I doubt it's real. Like, whatever. Don't be ridiculous. He's like, we're going to be rich and happy. Like, who cares? And Mr. White says, I don't know what to wish for. And that's a fact, he said slowly. It seems I've got all I want. So again, he's happy in his life. Everything's good. He's got a loving wife. He's got a wonderful son. They spend time together. They have a beautiful home. Like, he really is like, I don't know, everything is good. So again, it's like being grateful for what you have. Like, do you really need more things? Like, are you content in your life? Sorry. Man down. Okay. They're saying, so wish for 200 pounds, so a large sum of money. So his father's smiling shamefacedly at his own credulity. So he's like smiling with a bit of like shame that the fact that he's like believing in it, right? He's like kind of embarrassed. So he holds it up. I wish for 200 pounds, said the old man distinctly, so very clearly. And then he starts freaking out and crying, and everyone's like, oh, what's wrong? And it twisted in my hands like a snake, so a simile. So he's saying, it moved in my hand, I swear, right? And then the wife's like, I don't think so, like regarding him anxiously. So again, that's telling us that she, as her character, is like worried about him. Like, I don't know, that might have been in your mind there, honey. Okay, so they kind of sit down for the evening, and they're kind of staring nervously at the sound of a door banging upstairs. So they're all nervous. So showing us that they do believe deep down there is some truth, like the energy in the room, right? A silence, unusual and depressing, settled upon all three, which lasted until the old couple rose to retire for the night. So there's this eerie mood in the room, like they do believe it, right? So that's setting that precedence of fear that's gonna take place. You could put personification for like the dying fire, right, at the bottom of page 6. And so a testament to like his fear or this supernatural item, Mr. What's his name now? White. He starts seeing like faces in the fire, right? He's so scared that he has to get a glass of water to throw it on it. Okay, so it's like his fear is manifesting into reality, or this supernatural item is like causing for him to see these like distressing items. So his hand grasped the monkey's paw, and with a little shiver, he wiped his hand on his coat and went up to bed. So he's like, ugh, like he's displaying genuine concern and fear. So he obviously believes that it has some type of like mystical power. Okay, page 7, the morning. It's a bright winter morning with sun. The sun's kind of like they're laughing at their fears, and the dried, shriveled little paw was pitched on the sideboard with carelessness, which betokened no great belief in its virtues. So the paw's kind of been like thrown to the side. They're like, ugh, whatever, it's not true, we don't have any money, like, what baloney. And Mrs. White too, right? Oh, these soldiers are the same, telling tales, all this nonsense. And really, like, how could 200 pounds hurt you? And the son's joking, like, oh, unless maybe it fell from the sky and dropped on your head, ha, ha, ha. So they're really not thinking it's believable or taking it seriously. A bit of foreshadowing, right? Morris said things happen so naturally, said his father, that you might so wished attribute it to coincidence. So fate, like, takes things away, or how the wishes come to you is so natural that you think, like, oh, maybe that is just how life was meant to happen. You might not pair it with the wish. Okay, and the son's joking too, like, oh, well, if you get all this money, don't turn into this like rich, pompous man with arrogance. Like, I'll have to tune you in or disown you, ha ha ha. And so the day goes on. The mother and father are waiting for their son to come home from work, and they're in the mail. They get some bills, and they're like, oh, Herbert will laugh at this, that we have bills to pay. We didn't get any money from wishing, he he he. Okay, and then at the top of page 8, she's saying too, like, you thought you felt the paw moved, said the old lady soothingly. So kind of like, there, dear, we know you're going a little crazy, it's fine, or like, that wasn't real. But he's saying, like, I did. And then the turn of events. So they see a man dressed in very fancy clothes. So that'd be like a symbol for wealth, right? Like, he's dressed in a silk hat, glossy newness, right? So how he's described his appearance is very symbolic of wealth. So she's thinking too, like, the money wish, like maybe he's here to give us wish. And you can see he is displaying some hesitancy about coming into the house, right? 3 times he paused at the gate, doesn't want to come in. So you can see that he's like building up the courage to actually do it. So showing he isn't sure about going inside. So she brought the stranger in, greets him, apologizes for like the mess. And then halfway down the page too, when it says, she then waited as patiently as her sex would permit for him to broach his business, but he was at first strangely silent. So you have to think of the time period, right? For women, like, they are more in that submissive role. So she's waiting anxiously to hear what he has to say, because she can't be like, why are you here? What do you want? Tell me what you want to say. Like, get to it, quick. She has to be like, welcome to my home. Anything I can get you? Right? You get what I'm saying. And she's saying, is anything the matter? Finally, right? Breathlessly, like she's been holding her breath, like she's desperate to know. Has anything happened? And the husband saying, like, don't jump to conclusions. I'm sure he's fine. And then he says, I'm sorry. And is he hurt? badly hurt, he said quietly, but he is not in any pain, right? So meaning he is deceased, right? He's not suffering. So again, that pun, which we see in Shakespeare all the time too, right? When they say he's at peace or something, usually it means that like they've died. But she's like, oh, thank God. Like she doesn't really clue in yet. And then she broke off suddenly as the sinister meaning of the assurance dawned upon her, and she saw the awful confirmation of her fears in the other's averted face. So she's so upset, right? She realizes he's dead. And he was caught in some machinery in a low voice, so showing that like sympathy. So the wife's like staring out the window, or he sat staring out the window, taking his wife's hand between his own, pressed it as he had been from their old courting days nearly 40 years before. So we see they have had this long relationship, happy relationship. He's holding her hand like he did when they were first like dating. And her face turns white, right? Showing that like shock. She's staring out into nothing. You can hear her breathing. And then the simile there on the husband's face is a look such as his friend, the sergeant, might have carried into his first action. So just like shock. And so now we see the turn of events, right? The business wants to award them with a sum of money in condolences, and it ends up being 200 pounds. So that's the big moment of like, oh my God, we got the money from the wish, but we tempted fate. So fate took something dear to us away to grant us this wish. So is it worth it in the end? Not really. The old man smiled faintly, put out his hands like a sightless man, so a simile, and dropped to the floor. So then part 3, the last part, alliteration there, steeped in shadow and silence. But the days are passing, and you see how their lives have completely changed, right? Hopeless resignation of the old. They hardly exchange a word. They had nothing to talk about. Their days were long to weariness. So they had this like beautiful, happy life, and now they have nothing. They're not even talking really. Their life has no meaning without their son. And he's trying to convince her to like come back to bed. It's cold, and she's like, it's colder for my son, like referencing he's dead in the ground, right? So, and she's sobbing, and she's crying, right? So even for that, I put like metaphor, like a wild cry, like this animalistic cry from his wife. And then she's like, the paw, let's use the paw to make a wish. And she's crying and she's laughing. But so for theme, right, was that not enough? He demanded fiercely. So he's learned the lesson. He understands what the sergeant meant. He's like, I don't want to mess with that anymore. We've had to pay so gravely for our first mistake. The man sat up in bed and flung his bedclothes from his quaking limbs. So quaking, you're shaking, you're fearful. Okay, good God, are you mad? He cried aghast. So he's shocked. He can't believe she wants to try this. So really highlight a lot of those descriptors for how they say something, because that is for character. Get back to bed, he said, unsteadily. You don't know what you're saying. So he's uneasy. We had the first wish granted, said the old woman feverishly. So she's mad with determination. She's like, this is how we can get him back. It's the only way. And he says, he's been dead 10 days. I could only recognize him by his clothing. If it was too terrible for you to see then, how now, right? He caught in the machinery, his body was destroyed. He couldn't even recognize him. So again, maybe a bit of foreshadowing there too. And she's like, I'm not going to be fearful of the child I've nursed. Like, let's get this going. So wish, she cried with a strong voice. She's really trying to convince him. It's foolish and wicked, he faltered. So again, theme for that one. He learned his lesson. He doesn't want to mess with fate anymore. And because she's just gone crazy from like his death, and then the notion of like, I can get him back. She wants it so desperately. And then some really nice like imagery of like the candle throwing pulsating shadows on the ceiling and walls until with a flicker larger than the rest it expired. So building that like tension in the room. The old man with unspeakable sense of relief at the failure of the talisman crept back to his bed, and a minute or two afterward the old woman came silently and apathetically beside him. So he wishes, nothing happens, and he's like, whew, sense of relief, and she's sad that it didn't work, but he's like, oh, good, like I don't have to worry about anything. And again, on top of page 13, right, more imagery, like a stair creaked, the squeaky mouse scurried noiselessly through the wall. The darkness was oppressive, and after lying for some time, screwing up his courage, the husband took the box of matches and, striking one, went downstairs for a candle. So kind of just showing how they're like not sleeping and the darkness is oppressive on them. And then a knock, so quiet and stealthy as to be scarcely audible, sounded on the front door. So he's like, oh no. He hears the knock. His breath, he stood motionless, his breath suspended, so he's not breathing. He's frozen with fear. And he swiftly like runs back to his room. Okay, I'm sure we can all relate to that. Like, I know when I get really scared, I like stop moving and you run to your room and under the covers. So he's hiding from it. That's his response. And then the wife hears it, and her response is to run and open the door. Okay, and so he's trying to open the door, and he's calling pleadingly, like, please do not do it, right? So showing his response is like, I don't want to see him. Don't open the door. And so she's trying to open the bolt to the door, and she can't reach it, so he hears her like getting a chair. And so his response is he runs, and on his last wish, we don't know what he wishes for, but when the woman opens the door, her son's not there, and this loud wail of disappointment and misery from the wife comes out, right? And the last line, the street lamp's flickering, and it's a deserted road, so he's nowhere to be seen. So she's like, ah. So basically, because of them, like maybe having greed or what have you, and not adhering to their friends' warnings, they suffer the loss of their son and like don't learn their lesson. Yeah. So in the questions, it's different than the other two stories. So you only have 8 questions, but adhere to how many marks they're out of. Okay, the whole thing's out of 35. So if it's out of 5 marks, like have 5 sentences at least, or 5 strong points that I can give you a mark for. Yeah, and so read the questions carefully. Okay, if you have any questions, make sure you ask me. But yeah, so this is our last short story. I know you're probably all sick of annotating, so this is the last one that you have to do. And if you have any questions, pop into my office hours tomorrow, because the story's not due till tomorrow evening. So you have more time to go over it after this lesson. And yeah, sorry this video is a bit longer, but it is what it is. I hope you guys have a great week, great day. I don't know if I'll post another video this week, but I'll see you when I see ya. Goodbye.